All right, guys. Well, thank you for hanging with us for the second portion of the program. As promised earlier, we're going to transition from framing and move into more traditional considerations of critical thinking. As we reflect on our educational experiences, either in elementary school or secondary school, in college and university, critical thinking skills generally are not part of the curriculum. And as I think of my own professional identity, that of a certified industrial hygienist, all of the exam questions, the board exam questions that I had to answer were essentially, can you apply a calculation? It very little case study, kind of think about this, and you're presented with this kind of information, what's missing, what kinds of gaps are there, what other kinds of processes that we need to reflect on and consider as we move forward in time to really provide the best possible answer. Let me be absolutely clear with you that as we talk about critical thinking, what we would like to do as an end result is to come up with the best possible solution to a set of circumstances that we might find ourselves in, recognizing that we could produce a menu of solutions, and there is no one right solution that may be applied in every particular case. And as we transition into this particular module, I would like to ask you to reflect on this little story. Many years ago in Bangladesh, there was a shortage of drinking water in many of the communities there in that country. And good-meaning people like me and others, what did we recommend to our partners that were engineers? Oh, let's go drill wells and provide drinking water to communities. And by God, that's exactly what we did. And as we went out, when I say we, I mean the public health community, as we went out and did that, what we didn't recognize is that there was arsenic in the drinking water that would begin to accumulate in higher and higher concentrations as the water table went down. And now, of course, there is massive arsenic exposure to a wide swath of the citizens of Bangladesh, simply because we in public health thought that we were doing the right thing. And so we need to think through carefully all of the different implications of the processes and the interventions that we would like to implement, not only across the world, but more importantly, right here at home. In my own case, I'm very interested, as Dr. Surratt knows, is in indoor air pollution. This is how I started my public health career. And we worked extensively in East Africa promoting cook stove programs. About a year ago, Hillary Clinton called this the year of the cook stove, to provide energy-efficient stoves to women all around the world so they wouldn't have to spend so much time collecting firewood and placing themselves at risk of rape and other atrocities, as in places like in the Congo. And so, boy, we were really successful long before Hillary Clinton in doing that. And what we found is in many communities where we provided these energy-efficient stoves, where women then, instead of having to burn 10 kilos of firewood a night, they only burned a kilo, right? So a lot less expensive and a lot less time consuming. So guess what the fallout of that was? Right? Doesn't that sound like a brilliant public health intervention? Right? Women have more time to spend with their kids. The girl child doesn't have to go out and collect firewood. She can go to school. And so doesn't this sound wonderful? This is a wonderful public health intervention. Sadly, we didn't think like a mosquito. And speaking of framing and critical thinking, mosquitoes don't like smoke very much. And if you have an energy-efficient cook stove, you're producing less smoke. So guess what happened? Malaria rates went up after our public health interventions went into place. So this is not just an abstract, oh, let's just think critically because it's a fun way to spend a Monday morning. I mean, there are real implications to this. And I bet you can call out an example from your own desk at wherever you happen to work where you thought you were doing the right thing, but but yet at the point of the intervention itself, you actually created a ripple of perhaps greater problems than what you were trying to solve. And history is replete with those. So with those little vignettes in mind, I'd like to begin, and again, let me repeat, all of the slides will be available to the Coupa attendees, to all of you here. If you would like a slide deck immediately, see me at the break or after the program is over this morning, and I will email you, or if you have your laptop, I'll provide you an immediate copy of these slides. So what are we talking about? Okay, first of all, is we conceive of and digest the idea of critical thinking. What we're really talking about is the application of reason. And in the process, we want to question assumptions. This gets back to the whole frame issue that we discussed in the first couple of hours today. And we want to arrive at a balanced judgment on whatever set of conditions that we're in. Let me be clear, in most cases, you are not going to find the smoking gun. You are not going to get an answer that is so far superior to all other answers. Public health by its nature is ambiguous. I promise you, I'm telling you the truth. You need to embrace that and recognize that the conditionality of some of the decision making that we engage in. And what we want to do through critical thinking is to guide our actions so that we arrive at the best possible answer given local conditions and resources. Where can you use critical thinking? You can use it to determine what information is or is not pertinent to your particular set of circumstances. Have you ever been in a conversation where you'll ask someone a question and they talk for 5 minutes, but they never really answered the question that you asked? They tell you why something happened or something that, it's like, oh, and, I love my spouse very much, but she's absolutely brilliant at this, where she'll talk about all the other stuff. It's like, well, wait a second. Can you just say yes or no? Recognize logical flaws in arguments as you listen to people talk and digest information in the workplace, these endless committee meetings that we're in. Can you recognize the flaws in their arguments? And then, by all means, the one thing, and I wish I could go back after my 18 years in academia and be sure to tell students, don't overstate any conclusions that you arrive at. The one thing that you can do to wreck your upward trajectory is to have a pattern of overstating what you think that you found, and to recognize, as I mentioned earlier, that a problem may have no clear answer or single solution. And this is where the framing and the political considerations of hazardous materials and environmental health in general become germane. Can you find the flaw in this argument? And if you can't read it, I'll read it for you. The cool thing about being famous is traveling. I have always wanted to travel across seas, like to Canada and stuff. And this is Britney Spears. And this is an actual quote. I didn't make this up. And I can provide you the citation, which I didn't have time to. But I mean, this is the kind of thing, hopefully, that we can have a good chuckle at, but also recognize that there's lots of this kind of stuff going on, not only in general society, but in our profession as well, where we say and do some of the goofiest things, oftentimes with good intentions. I'm not suggesting for a moment that there's nefarious characters running around and deliberately causing problems. So I'd like to open it up, and I'm sad that this room is so big and people feel a little bit disinclined to comment, but I want you to, as we begin this process, to think about these statements and tell me what your thoughts are on them. Lawnmowers create more air pollution than jet skis. Have you ever been around a jet ski when they're operating? I come from the anti-jet ski camp. I'm sorry, I'll just admit that in public here this morning. I know that they're a lot of fun. My kids tell me that they're a lot of fun. I just see all the oil and diesel stuff coming out the back of those. It just horrifies me as an environmental health guy. But what do you think of that statement? Is it true? What do you make of it? Did you hear that? Thank you.
Okay, so there's more lawnmowers than jet skis. I'll repeat some of the stuff.
Okay, there's a comment in the back.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
How many lawnmowers versus jet
Yeah. See, you guys are quite bright. When I first saw that, I was like, huh, that's interesting. Lawnmowers, in fact, there's more lawnmowers than there are jet skis. Jet skis are disgusting in terms of the amount of particulate and oil and hydrocarbons that they release. But sure as hell right. Excuse me?
How many of those lawnmowers are electric?
How many of those lawnmowers are electric? And by the way, there's a media shift there. I mean, I know everyone wants to go with electric energy, but that is powered by some fossil fuel, would be my guess. I mean, there's fewer and fewer nuclear power plants. So there's that whole media shift thing that's going on. By the way, for the record.
Other comments?
What kind of a pollutant are lawnmowers to the water over jet skis? Why is it only air pollution? Why is that the only measure of pollution for those two to be compared?
Yep. So perhaps even the question that we're asking is the wrong question, right? Thank you. That's a good idea. By the way, for the record, and I'm being taped, so I want to say that the Dyjack household purchased a Prius here recently. And as we drove around San Jose and San Francisco last night, I noticed that we were way behind the times because I saw Priuses everywhere. So evidently the West Coast is big in these. All right, how about the second bullet? The Clinton administration implemented the biggest tax increase in history. Thoughts? You better believe some people are out on the stump this week talking about this, how those Democrats always want to raise taxes and things.
These people have learned you don't talk about, politics, religion, or,
okay, right. Well, in fact, from an absolute numerical perspective, this in fact might be true. It is possible that the Clinton administration, by the way, I made this up, so I don't know where the actual fact is, but so the Clinton administration, or there's been recent administrations where the tax increases that elected officials running for higher office point to, in fact, it's true. But as a relative percent, some Republican presidents have raised taxes more than the Democratic ones. It's just times have changed. Inflation has impacted its ugly head on us. So the absolute dollar value, that might be true, but the effect on you and I is probably minimal relative to other tax increases that perhaps other administrations. So this is a kind of thing where you can lie with statistics. Right, you guys are familiar with clinical significance and statistical significance, and that is the mathematics may be correct, but what the message they're trying to convey is absolutely, in some cases, polar opposite. Marilyn, you had some illustrations.
Okay, so there's a debate going on right now at Cal EPA, and there's this huge discussion over local implementing agencies and local oversight programs. And so what about the statement that local implementing agencies close fewer cases than local oversight programs? One, you may or may not have heard it, but if you heard it, what's it based on?
I think it's an inaccurate statement because LIAs have different kinds of cases than LOPs, and they usually close them faster, and they usually have less that would fall into what they can cover. So you're comparing apples and oranges. Okay.
And in fact, I was on a call with this, and I'm gonna see. I'm representing Loma Linda today, so I can say these two people here can put their, go at me, even though that they work in my organization, because I'm not representing San Bernardino County Fire today, and so I'm feeling a little free today to say I was on a call where this was being discussed, and I'll give you a little bit of the conversation. How do we know that LIAs are closing fewer cases than LOPs? Because we went out to the US EPA, went out to the LIAs, and the LOPs are the only ones who enter data in GeoTracker. Remember, this is the data management god we all serve in site remediation. And but LIAs are not required to, never have been. So we are all looking at a data system. Well, then how do we know what LIAs do in terms of data? Well, we went out to the LIAs. What data was entered? The cases that are open. Not the cases that are closed. So we didn't go out and enter all the cases, only the cases that were open. And from that concluded that LIAs closed fewer cases than LOPs and massive, so made beautiful pie charts, by the way. But what we need to be careful of, whatever that conversation and whatever was concluded from that, it might be incomplete, is when we make judgments like this or hear them, is to go back to the source and say, on what data, what comparisons, and as Angie said, is it comparable, the kind of cases that LAs and LPs were. ABC Company in San Bernardino has more violations than ABC Company in San Diego. Why are we worried about that right now? Why are we worried about this being something that might be said? Uniformity. And we're more worried about this kind of statement being made because?
We want to make sure that each county is looking at it the same way as other counties.
Right, so we're more worried about it because we want to make sure that that each county is looking at it the same way. Do we look at it the same way? I could have 5 violations to your 1 violation that was representing the same situation, right? And why are we worried about it? Because it's going to become a lot more visible with SIRS, right? So right now, you go to one agency, you go to the other agency, you go to another agency, you wouldn't be looking at it on a perspective that's going to make it all in one data system. When it becomes in one data system, you can bet those comparisons will be made, even though the underlying data has not been standardized. Okay, XYZ company in San Francisco is more hazardous than Fred's company in Sacramento. Say it again. So the comment is, it all depends on how it's regulated. San Francisco might regulate differently. What else? I'm going to pass this around. You should have opinions on this stuff. This is your profession.
Is it the same kind of industry? Because given the names, you wouldn't. It's not implied that it's the same type of industry. They're not producing the same type of thing. So there's a lot of variables, I guess, when you make that statement.
Comparable industry. What else? What's more hazardous mean? What? How toxic it is, that might be one measure of hazardous.
More releases, possible releases.
More releases. It could blow up. There are different types of hazards, right? That's our thing, right? We're out there doing all sorts of things that are hazardous for various reasons. So, yes. Proximity. So let's go on to the next.
Oh, how about the sensitivity of the populations that are there? Do you have a lot of kids or?
Right, so if we go on to the next slide, some of this will be things that are familiar to some of you who've looked at risk. If we're actually talking about more hazardous, the hazardous term might actually be someone's way of talking about something we might call risk or something else. And I'm not even saying these are the concepts that someone should be using. But we know that in some cases, we look at the probability that something might happen, the consequences of it happening, which could be the surrounding populations, whether they're there at all, how sensitive they are. On the consequences might be, is it going to be a toxic effect? Is it going to be that something's going to burn or explode? Is it going to be that the employees are going to get hurt? Is it going to be that we're going to have a fire that goes on for 5 days? Is it going to be that we're going to close down the freeway and cause 5 accidents? So the probability and the severity of consequences and the types of things that enter into that, the amount of community upset that is going to be caused by the event all by itself. Are we talking about just perception of risk? This is a chemical people are scared of. So it's just the community's perception. Has this facility violated the public's trust before? And they are known for that, and therefore there is sensitivity, there's a perception that this is a risky operation. So do they have a history? Have they had previous releases before? Might be an indication of risk, or it might be an indication that they've cleaned up their act. you know, because they had to go through a process of actually evaluating that. So what does it mean? We don't know what it means, but we better be clear on how we came to any kind of conclusion. In fact, we're not very likely to make those kind of statements. The people in this room are not likely to say more or less on those kind of terms. We are more likely to use much more specific terms about this person handles that substance, has had so many releases, and some more details. So and keep in mind that things like risk perception may be playing into those kind of statements, but you need to be clear on what your frame is and what the audience frame is and any other participant in the discussion, because our frames of thinking are influencing the decisions that are being made about this, including the state regulator versus federal regulator versus local regulator. And this is happening even now with the current pre-SIRS stuff when we get a call from US EPA that says, why haven't you taken enforcement action against somebody who you entered having a violation? And we're saying because they're cooperating with us. That's a perception of a federal regulator versus a local regulator due to the availability of information that can't be understood simply as data. So keep that in mind, that these frames that we're talking about, how we frame things, is now feeding into this critical thinking, because now you have to think critically about where did we come up with the conclusion, what assumptions were made when we came up with that conclusion, what data fed into it, and these underlying pieces, so we can break it back out and say, how do we come to this conclusion?
Marilyn, as you go through your thought process, and anyone in the audience, do you ever think about the number of people that are placed at risk versus the sensitivity of the population? I mean, I see in California back a long time ago, was that high hazardous waste facility ever placed, was it Needles?
We had two residuals repositories proposed in San Bernardino County. Neither were ever cited. That were the hazardous waste residuals repositories. The low-level radioactive waste site was a different issue. But these in terms of, yes, the severity of consequences, actually the law we talked about before, CalARP requires that the number of people that are at risk be part of the equation of what you look at. That is the number under the curve.
Okay.
Okay,
thank you. So now a little bit of critical thinking 101, and I don't want to see people's eyes glaze over as we go through this, but we have to get some operational definitions down. So there's a few repeated terms that you'll see in critical thinking literature, and let's just go through these quickly so you have a sense of those as we move forward. Number one, when someone says that there's a claim involved, a claim is a thing we say or express in writing to convey information, opinions, or beliefs. That is a claim. Number two is the issue, and these are questions. Is the claim that's being made true or false? And then we get into traditional arguments, and these are produced to support that a claim is true. Under arguments, there are premises and conclusions. A premise can offer support for the conclusion if the conclusion is true. And we're going to go through some illustrations if mentally you're like, I can't track all this. And then two, is relevant to the conclusion. I'd mentioned earlier that I'm often in conversations where people provide all kinds of data and analysis that is not germane to the question that's at hand. And so premise to be absolutely technically accurate has to be relevant to the issue under consideration. And then finally, a conclusion. This is a decision that's made or an opinion formed after considering the relevant facts or evidence. For example, a jury will come to a conclusion based on the evidence that it's been provided. The attorneys will certainly argue one way or another with the evidence that they have, and they'll provide a number of different premises that support their contention. And I think what we have here next and I just want to be sure that in terms of the operational definition of an argument is an attempt to support or prove a claim or assertion by providing reasons for accepting it, right? So an argument is not throwing things at your siblings, but it's an attempt to support or prove a claim or assertion by providing reasons for accepting it. There are two kinds of arguments, and for those of you that have had a class in psychology, maybe some of this will come back to you. The first kind of argument is a deductive argument, and this is where the conclusion must be true provided that the premises are true. And let's go through a very simple illustration. And you know, Kristen Riegel was just in the back of the room. The claim is that I'm taller than Kristen Riegel, who was just in the back. Maybe when she saw her name, she ran away. That David Dyjack is taller than Kristen Riegel. One premise is that David Dyjack is taller than Marilyn Kraft. A second premise is that Marilyn Kraft is taller than Kristen Riegel, and the conclusion then is that I'm taller than Kristen. This sounds like your SAT test, right, or your GRE test from many years ago around the analytical kinds of stuff. So that's a deductive kind of quantitative approach related to deductive arguments. So we can deduce what the truth is or deduce the best possible answer by looking at a number of logical sequences. Okay, inductive arguments will not lead to such clarity. And this is where attorneys love to battle in court. Inductive argument doesn't prove or demonstrate a conclusion. They support it. Doesn't prove or demonstrate a conclusion. They support it. The more support the premise of inductive argument provides for the conclusion, the stronger the argument is. All right? So this makes arguments stronger or weaker. And you know, if you watch TV or have been involved in a court case, attorneys often have to present a case that's beyond a reasonable doubt, right? They don't have deductive arguments, they have an inductive argument. So they try to provide all these premises that will in fact lead the jury to conclude one particular side or another. Now this last bullet, just stay with me for just a second here. And this is a cautionary note. Research has demonstrated that people are inclined to seek solutions to problems that are more consistent with their existing hypothesis. Remember those frames from an hour ago? If people are framing out the way that they're thinking, they are more likely to buy into answers that they think are in line with the way that they process information. And I think this is important to consider as we move forward. Any questions so far? Yeah, I'm amazed. Everyone's eyes are still open. I'm really delighted to see it. Okay, so here's an inductive reasoning example. Has anyone here read the book, The Black Swan? Not the movie, which actually is a great flick, by the way, but the book, The Black Swan, by Talib. If you see it, I mean, it's really worthwhile if you get the opportunity. I think the author's last name is T-A-L-E-B. I think it's Talib. Okay, so here is an example of inductive reasoning. The first premise is white swans are the only swans we see in Europe. The second premise is white swans are common in my community. The third premise is I happen to live in Europe. The fourth premise is my pillow is filled with swan down, which is white. So what can we reasonably conclude about swans? If your worldview is that, and you live in Europe, and all you see are white swans, what's your conclusion? All swans are white. Seems reasonable, right? Has anyone here ever been to Australia? In fact, it's black swans are the most common swans in Australia. And so we can't assume right then, or we make a faulty assumption by suggesting just because of our worldview, all swans are white. And Talib's book, The Black Swan, I mean, he uses this illustration, which is where I've gleaned this from. Having said that, Talib will suggest that what you don't know is more important than what you know. What you don't know is more important than what you know. And he has this 300 or 400 page book that makes this case over and over again. For example, 9/11. On 9/10, we didn't think about flying planes into buildings in the way that we experienced on 9/11. For any of you that flew here for this meeting today, you'll know that your life has changed dramatically. What happened in Iraq and what happened in Afghanistan and all these places, all on 9/10, the day before 9/11, we would have never envisioned this. Our entire world changed by that singular event, but yet it was not predictable. And as you think about what you do at work every day, just keep that concept in mind. Most of us